So welcome to the channel. On today's video, we're going to start a little series here, finishing up working on and building an 800 square foot shop. And in today's episode, we're going to cover the sheathing, some do's, some don'ts, and some proper techniques on how to hang sheathing. A lot of this will apply to building a home as well. So as you can see, we already have one wall complete, and we're going to continue to work all the way around this building, including the gable ends. So we're using your standard 7/16 OSB sheathing. And one important note, let's start off with a discussion on strength axis. As you can see, the majority of your OSB nowadays is labeled the direction of a strength axis. And what that means is the way that these strands are orientated, which is typically horizontal the long ways of the sheet. That's what gives you your strength. And typically, you'll lay a sheet horizontal to your vertical studs. So there's a lot of debate on the internet to what's the proper direction to lay, but if you read a lot of very important documents out there where some testing's been done for home building, there is a dramatic increase in wind shear or wind load against paneling, especially when spaced further apart, say 24-inch spacing. We're doing 16-inch stud spacing here, but there is a significant increase in wind load rating or shear on a panel that is horizontal to the studs versus straight up and down with them. Go read some of that. So let's go ahead and get our first sheet cut, start on the front here, and we'll talk about some more do's and don'ts when it comes to sheathing. All right, so now that we have our first measurement, we're going to make a mark, and I'm going to show you a little device that I use here. I actually picked this up really cheap at Harbor Freight, but it's called a saw guide clamp, and it works perfect for cutting down sheathing on a job like this. So what a lot of people don't know, whenever you're ripping down sheets of plywood like this with a circular saw, for example, you can see the blade itself down here is offset from this side of the saw. And a lot of people don't realize this is exactly 1.5 inches. So when you're going to run the side of your saw up against a guide, you want to take your measurement plus 1.5 inches and then make the mark. And the mark is ultimately where you're going to put the guide itself. So the cool thing about this guy right here is it has an adjustable clamp. It's made for 48-inch wide sheets of sheathing just like this or plywood. You want to put the guide on that mark that I just made on the other side. Again, the mark is 1.5 inches more than I need, and that allows for the saw blade spacing. You clamp this down right here on the end, and now I'm ready to make my cut. So perfectly straight cuts every time with this saw guide, and it was very inexpensive. So another tip whenever it comes to putting up sheathing is 16 penny nails, or your common framing nail right here. They typically have just over a 1/8 inch spacing, and that's a key spacing whenever it comes to putting up sheathing. But one thing I like to use these for, you'll hear people talk about, well, where they want their OSB to stop. I personally like to take a nail, drive it in between the bottom plate and the concrete. This is especially helpful when working alone. Now those nails that are driven in actually hold up my sheathing for me. Now, if you believe in having some overlap of your sheathing past the concrete, obviously this technique won't work. As long as your bottom plate is sealed properly to the slab itself, I tend to like this technique. All right, so next let's talk about nails and nail spacing. So this is going to be determined ultimately by your engineer, especially if you're building a home. Maybe not quite as critical for a open shop like this. So I'm going to snap to an image here real quick. We just got done building our house, and our engineer required a specific length nail and what's called a nail pattern. So on the outside edge of a sheet, you'll see a specific nail pattern, and on the what's called in the field, that is any stud like this that we're going to hit in the middle of the sheet, typically you'll have another nail spacing as well. So when in doubt, always make for sure that you follow your engineered plans, length of nails, type, and edge spacing in the field spacing for nailing. Now, whenever it comes to nailing out in the field, as you can see, it's kind of blind. I can't see the stud where it goes down here. Some people are very good, do this for a living, and they can hit that stud all the way down just by eyeballing and lining up where to put the nail gun. So a couple of techniques you can use. You can take your standard T-square, hang it over, draw your line, or just leave it right here and actually nail down alongside the T-square. But keep in mind, it can actually fall off. Or you can make a jig right here. This is one that my father made. We're over here working on his shop. And all he did was just cut down a 1x4. Actually made a 1x4 spacer and then made this to where it will hang right over the 1/2 inch material. It will not fall back off on you now. And now you have a guide you can nail on the outside edge of this, and it's showing you right where the stud is. So both techniques work. The T-square, most people already own, but you got to keep your hand on it so it doesn't jump off on you. The little cheap 1x4 built guide is an excellent little tip. So when in doubt, always refer to your panels, but you'll notice some spacing requirements here for these panels, 1/8 of an inch at the sides and the ends. So what that spacing requirement for is some expansion and contraction. So you want to make sure you leave a gap here. Wood will expand and contract. All right, so you remember the nails we put in the bottom down here to hold our sheet? Again, the reason we're going with these 16 penny nails, this gives you almost perfect 1/8 inch spacing. So if you're trying to follow that requirement there, you can actually come in above the next sheet, nail these in. And what that'll do for you when you put your next sheet on and slide it down, it'll go ahead and give you that proper gap in spacing. You can pop those nails right back out, move on to the next sheet. So these nails are very helpful for a lot of different reasons whenever putting up sheathing. All right, so one thing worth noting right here, you can notice we flipped the sheet back inside out. I meant to do that on this sheet right here. We talked about this a while back on the channel when I was building the house and putting up sheathing, what these marks mean. Now on full sheets, these marks will actually line up, I believe it's with 16 and 24 inch stud spacing, your most common one, if you start them correctly. And these reference lines can be used for nailing into, basically blind nailing, and not using the tools that I just showed you. Some people will argue that this must be on the inside. Some people will say it needs to be flipped around to the outside just like this. I couldn't find anywhere in code that was required. The only time I seen that it was mentioned is when doing a second story floor, that you should leave the writing to the bottom side. So if the inspector were to come inside the house before it's, sheetrocked up, look up to the bottom side of the second story floor, they can read the information to make sure you have the proper thickness and type of floor sheathing, whatever that may be, plywood, OSB, doesn't matter. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. I could not find anywhere a requirement for inside or out. Some people also claim that the smooth, almost waxy feeling side with the writing on it is more weather resistant. I've read that, but I can't find for sure that that's true. So something I just remembered worth mentioning in the big which side should be in or out debate on OSB in particular. What you may or may not be able to tell from the camera is one side is slick, almost a waxy coating. Again, some people think that's better for exterior, although I couldn't find any proof in that. The only thing that I could find mentioned by manufacturers for inside versus out, I even remember one company specifically saying there's no difference in strength. That's all about horizontal versus vertical. But whenever you do walking applications, specifically a roof, typically you do not put the slick side up, well, for a hazard of slipping and falling off of the roof. You want to use this rough textured side. That's the only information I could find while one side's textured, one side is slick. Roofing applications. You can get a really good grip on this side, and you've got your lines for nailing off. I should also mention that typically you're going to see your tightest nail spacing around the outside edge, especially on engineered home plans, because keep in mind, that's where the sheet is actually going to want to lift and peel from in high winds. So now I'll just remove these nails that gave us the proper spacing, and we just repeat the process. Put these right back in just above the next sheets for spacing. So when you have to make a long diagonal cut, or more importantly, the measurement for the roof right here, there's a couple ways you can go about it. You can find the angle, use an actual angle finder, draw that on, or you can take 2 quick measurements across the length of that angle and actually transfer them to the board. Now, when you have to do a long line and potentially you don't have any help, that's where a chalk line is your friend. So at the very end down here, I measured up to where the first angle starts. I know that's at 31 7/8 of an inch. So I made a mark on my board here. I'll take something like this jigsaw and make a small notch in the edge of the board. And what that small notch right where I made my mark will allow me to do is take this chalk line string, put it down into that notch, and it'll hold it for me. I'll then pull that string over to the next mark that I made. This is the top of the angle for this board. Hold that chalk line down to it and transfer that line. Now I have the angle to cut to match up to the roof. All right, so another awesome piece of equipment worth having whenever you're doing sheathing like this. For all the doorways and windows that we have to cut out, there's something I like to use called a panel bit. This keeps you from having to measure out and go ahead and pre-cut all those openings, praying that everything will line up correctly. So this particular bit right here has a sharp point on it, so you can actually plunge it through the sheathing itself, move over, find the stud that'll ride along this smooth part, work up and around the open. All right, so what did you think about that? These things are a lifesaver. They speed up the process so much. They keep you from having to do all that measuring. And anytime you have little pieces hanging over like I do right here, they're great for just finishing up and getting everything nice and perfect so your doors, windows, everything else will fit whenever it comes time to install them. Okay, so we're gonna wrap this video up right here on the sheathing on this barn build that we're doing right here and make a little mini series out of it while I'm building it. So next is gonna be house wrap, putting our vapor barrier up, showing how we're gonna flash out for doors and windows, then we'll get those installed. Eventually, we're gonna be moving on to doing some hardy board siding and trim over here and a few other things that we'll include. Thanks for watching.